Paper Division of J.D. Irving Limited, based in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada, and has been involved in safety for 25 years. He holds a Bachelor of Business Administration from UNB St. John and a Master's of Science in Environmental Management from the Webster University, St. Louis, Missouri. He holds a Canadian Registered Safety Professional designation and a 6 Sigma Green Belt. I always think that that's something to do with jiu-jitsu or something. It's a Green Belt of the mind, right? He is the chair for the Board of Safety Services in New Brunswick, vice president of the Regional Screening Committee for the Board of Canadian Registered Safety Professionals, at-large member of the Advisory Committee for the American Society of Safety Professionals, and previously held the position of Regional Vice President, Atlantic Region for the CSSE. He is also an instructor for the Occupational Health and Safety Diploma program with the University of New Brunswick. Please welcome Darrel Nickerson.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, this is on. Okay, I had to do a quick change. And there is this.
Yep.
Forward, back.
Down is forward.
Down is forward. That's a new one. Well, good morning, folks. I'm going to move this because I'll knock it off. Assess your situation, identify the hazards. And
Then you'll need first aid.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the Brunswick Safety Association for inviting me today. I'm going to talk about fit for duty. It's a topic that's kind of timely when we talk about the main program, but it's something that is not well understood, and I think it's a good opportunity for us to review it. So here's the objectives for this morning. I want to talk, really define what is fit for duty. What does that actually mean? Understand the conditions that make up fit for duty, and review some of the strategies that might be available. The other thing, whenever I get in front of a group of folks, especially a group of like-minded individuals that are involved with safety, is I always look at it, I want to make sure that whenever I'm presenting, there's a couple of things that I want you to take away from. One is hopefully remind you of some of the things you already know, because you've been in safety for a while, and some of this is not new information. And hopefully it triggers in you something that you already know and that you maybe have forgotten, or at least reaffirms what you already know. The other thing is I hope you take at least one thing away. Is there one thing that you pick up on that maybe you want to do a little more research on, you want to understand a bit more, and maybe take back to your organization? So those are the two things that I'm hoping that you get out of today. And these are kind of some of the objectives. So, as they say in disclaimer, I am not a legal expert, I'm not a lawyer. I am not a psychologist, as my friend Glenn said. Not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. I'm a safety professional. I've done research. I've been into business now for over 20 years. It's funny, when Shelley went through all of the things that I've been doing, it just means I'm old. And I've been around for a long time. So, again, I'm not coming at this from a legal perspective. What I want to do is be able to provide you some information that I've learned, I've done some research on, and provide back to you. So, having said that, so what do we think of when we think of the term fit for duty?
You're awake.
You're awake? That's always a good one.
It's typically reference of the influence of actually drugs or alcohol.
Right. Drugs or alcohol. Most of the time when we talk about fit for duty, that's what we think. We think about folks that are potentially under the influence or can't do their job because of drugs or alcohol. And most, and I'm going to say for the last 15 years, that's really where our heads has been. When we think about fit for duty, it's about, are they under the influence, can they do their job? What it really means is the definition from the Occupational Environmental Medicine. It's about the physical and emotional state of the employee. It's not just about drugs and alcohol. It's about, are they physically fit? Are they mentally fit to be able to do the job. And if they're not, then of course they're not fit for duty. So whenever I approach something, I've been doing a lot of research, a lot of information gathering and discussing about risk management the last few years, and really diving deep into the subject. And when you think about fit for duty, we're going to talk about a lot of the hazards that make up fit for duty. At the end of the day, it's about risk management. Because the conditions that we will be discussing today are really a different type of hazards. We have the energy wheel. Some of you may be familiar with that. There are different topics out there. You want to talk about gravity, motion, mechanical. Those are the things we deal with every day. Those are the hazards that we can see, that we deal with, that we put control measures in place so that our folks don't get hurt. When we think about fit for duty, we want to think about it in the same way. Here's the hazards that we have that could cause our folks to be unfit. What are the controls we need to put in place to make sure that they remain? So I always like to go back to this. It's about risk perception and risk tolerance, just so we can level set ourselves about this whole risk topic. At the end of the day, first thing we need to do, if we're going to be better at risk management, is we need to identify the hazard. Do we know it, or do you see it? When we talk about these physical or emotional or physiological issues, do we actually see them? Do we recognize them as hazards? And if we do, which is really the first step of the exercise, then how do we perceive it? Do we actually understand what it means? Do we understand what we have to do differently in order to put the controls in place to make sure that our folks are safe? So that's kind of the premise that I want to have the conversation about today, is are we identifying these as hazards to our employees, to our workplaces, and do we understand what they mean? At the end of the day, then what do we do to fix this? So the balance of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the group from Energy Safety Canada developed a guideline back in 2020 on fit for duty. It's really good. They've done a really good job. They've done a lot of research. Anybody familiar with this guideline? A couple of folks in the room already familiar with it. That's good. It's available on their website. It is free. One of the things they say, you can share it. They just need to be acknowledged when they're sharing. So, in Canada, done a fantastic job. And at the end of this presentation, I do have references. So I believe the presentation will be made available to everybody. So the references are there, so you'll know where you can go to get the information. But I want to kind of walk through what they found and the guidelines that they've used. So when they talk about fit for duty, they talk about this, their house. There's really three pillars and a base of communication. And we're going to spend time talking about these three pillars, physical, physiological, and psychological. So when you look at these three pillars, the first one is physical. This is the one we typically understand, especially in our business. It's about the strengths, the vision, the hearing. Are our folks physically able to do the job? Are they fit to do the job that we expect them to do? So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the second pillar, which is the physiological. And it also includes fatigue, stress, drugs and alcohol, it is a portion of it, and workplace exposures. Third pillar is about the psychological conditions. So this is where we talk about workers' mental state. Are they mentally able to complete the tasks that you ask them to do? What is their risk tolerance? What's their culture? What's their phobias? People are made up of all kinds of different things, and we need to be able to understand those, and what do we do about those? And at the base of this is all about communication. How do we communicate to people? How do we make sure that they hear what we're saying and that they know where we can get them help? So let's jump right into the first pillar. First pillar is physical requirements. Again, most of us have a pretty good understanding of what this is. And you think about what are the physical demands of the job that you have. And I know most of you are used to up and going all day, and now we're making you sit for a couple of hours. job task assessments, right? So we look at the job and understand what are the tasks that they're expected to do. Is there lifting? Is there standing? Is there walking? Is there climbing? What are the physical demands that we have, or tasks that we ask them to do? And then you can do a physical demands analysis. Most of you will probably have done these. We could potentially bring in an ergonomist or somebody that has the right tool set and be able to understand, how heavy are things? What's the repetition? Is there twisting? What are the hazards that our folks are faced with the tasks that we ask them to do? And a lot of folks will also do pre-employment medicals. So we understand, once we understand what the tasks that we ask our folks to do, how do we know that our folks are physically able to do them? And can we match those up so that we don't cause undue harm to folks when they start their job, which could then lead to other issues? We'll talk about that when we get to the physiological or the psychological section. But there are all kinds of tools out there that you can use that are available. This is a lifting calculator that I've used for a number of years. And it's some simple math. You put in how heavy is the object that needs to be lifted, and where on the body, and it's not a very good picture to see, but it gives you kind of a starting point, and then you understand how many times is it lifted, is there twisting involved, and you can understand, gives you a number. And over that number, if the object that they're lifting is over that number, then you potentially are putting them in harm's way. So maybe you need to put the camera weight to be able to think about the controls that we need to put in place. So there's a myriad of tools that are out there that are available. And this one, like I said, I've been using for years. If you're interested in this one, I can send it to you and my contact information. Okay, let's spend a whole lot of time on the physical because we're pretty comfortable with that. We understand those pieces. We get into physiological conditions, fatigue, stress, alcohol or drugs, workplace exposures. Those type of things, those are, we understand them sort of, but sometimes we don't really think about them in this perspective. So we think about fatigue, and we always just think maybe somebody's tired or maybe they had a late night at work. We had our work safe a few years ago. Again, a long time ago, unfortunately. Susan is one of the foremost authorities in ergonomics, in fatigue in Canada. She's based out of Alberta. If anybody has ever heard of the 20-minute NASA nap, so years ago NASA did a study and they said that if you took a 20-minute nap, it kind of recharged all the things in your brain and the endorphins and all those things, and you were better able to do the tasks that you needed to do. Just last year, Susan was actually invited down to NASA to teach fatigue to NASA. The people who had actually come up with this know quite a bit about that. So if you have an opportunity to bring her in and have a conversation, I suggest you do that. But she's got her website has a number of controls and things that you can understand. This is not a session about fatigue, and I'm hoping that, again, if you want to learn more information, you can go seek that. But she has a wealth of knowledge and a lot of really good tools on her website, and I encourage you to go and take a look at it if you want to learn more. Stress. We don't have stress in our life, right? There are all kinds of stressors in this world, and I read this quote actually from the Canadian Mental Health Association that said, "Stress is a reaction to a situation. It's not about the situation." And when you think about that, we often see people react differently in different situations. And then you kind of take a step back and go, that was an odd reaction. I didn't expect that. And it's because the stress is about that reaction. It's not about the situation. Everybody will treat that differently. And we have to be aware of that, and we have to understand what do we need to do differently. And again, it says we usually feel stressed when we think about the demands. For probably most of the people in the room, getting up in front of people in a group of about 80 people would probably stress you, knowing it's done. this room, most of you are probably trainers, so it's not a lot of a bit. But at the end of the day, I've spoken to a lot of folks over a lot of years. In about the 10 minutes before, you probably didn't see me in the back of the room fidgeting, but in that 10 minutes before I go on, I get stressed. And I have to calm myself down, I have to not talk really fast, because a 1 hour talk will be 30 minutes. And I know I'm standing between you and lunch. That's never a good place to be. And I just mentioned lunch, so now you're not going to hear a thing I say for that 5 minutes. But stress, it's one of the things we got to understand better, because it is one of those things that, because people react differently, we can't predict how somebody's going to react to any situation. You have a workplace incident, and how are people going to react to that? Some people will freeze, some people will jump into action. It's all going to be different. So, what do we do? How do we help that? It's about coping skills. It's one of the things I tell you, 5 years ago I had been here, I didn't understand what coping skill was. I had no idea. I grew up in the 80s. Suck it up, princess, get back out there and do what you need to do. We've had a different mindset today. We're beginning to learn a lot more about mental health and about the stressors that we have in our life. And, we have to start learning what are those coping skills. How do folks cope with the stress? It's something that they have to do, but we have to understand it and be able to share with them. And talk to someone, again, it's not easy to do. We can say talk to someone, but, the MATES program, listen to that, sounds like a fantastic idea, because it's going to be a little more proactive, right? It's because if we do wait for somebody to talk to somebody, it's like, I'm not going to see you this week. I'm not going to do that. But if you have somebody reaching out to you and having a strategy for that is important. And of course, drugs and alcohol. I'm not going to spend a lot of time about that, because probably all of us are very familiar with it. We live it every day. We may have a drug and alcohol program. But it's important to understand, again, what are the impairment, what makes up impairment? What does that look like? And what is that doing to the person? And this is where, we talk about physiological. I've seen folks that, when you work with somebody every day, day in and day out, you may not see the little changes, because they're changing slowly over time. But if somebody is addicted to, especially some of the hard drugs, if you can see a physiological change even like, they get angry quicker, they're sure they have outbursts, their appearance will change. So understanding what that is and how to deal with that is important. Okay, not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, because most of us are familiar with it. Again, a lot of us have drug testing programs where we can understand it, and having an EFAP or employee family assistance program, whatever you call it, employee assistance plan, some place for them to go get help. Drugs and alcohol are addictions, and like all the other addictions that we have to treat them and make sure that folks know that there's avenues that they can go down to help them. And workplace exposures, again, in the construction industry, there are all kinds of workplace exposures that we have. And we know what they are. At the end of the day, these are hazards that we have to put controls in place for. And it's through education, doing our risk assessments, and making sure we have the right controls so that folks don't get harmed. Don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that, because most of us are quite familiar with those. This is where we get into a little more deeper the psychological conditions. And this information, I know you're reading it, and there's sense me reading it. It's amazing whenever you put a slide up that has words on it, people don't read it. So I would give them a chance to read it, because there's no sense me regurgitating. But you can see the impact that mental health has on our society. The cost of the cost to the Canadian society, the cost to our businesses is staggering. And when we talk about the psychological conditions, it's about violence, harassment, distractions, and human error. And how do we combat those? How do we understand those so that we can do a better job for our folks? So we talk about violence and harassment. At the end of the day, point final, there is no place for violence and harassment in our workplaces. We just absolutely cannot condone it. We cannot accept it, and we got to deal with it. Now, is it still there? Yes, absolutely. You know, you're not going to be naive enough to think that it's not there. And it's unfortunate, but we have to treat it differently than we did 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's just absolutely unacceptable. You know, we have bullying that happens on our workplaces, and we have those things that happen, and if we don't think they're happening in our workplace, then we haven't opened our eyes, because unfortunately it does. Again, I spent a whole lot of time. WorkSafe has done a really good job. There is regulation now around that. There's definitions about what that means. And I took this from their website. This is from if you go to their website, the safety topics. Violence harassment is one of the topics. Really good information there about what violence harassment is, what you need to do about it. And as legislation pointed out, we need to have, every business needs to have a code of practice around violence harassment. So lots of good information on the WorkSafe site, and there are professionals out there that can help you. So again, no such thing, I'm not going to talk about this a lot. This is a high level, I'm just giving you a bunch of information that you can take away, and hopefully something will stick. Now, distractions. Distractions are surprisingly a big part of our everyday. You know, we typically think about the cell phones or the external things that are happening to us that cause distractions. But ourselves are probably the biggest distractions that we have. NB Power, some folks from NB Power in the room, years ago, Dr. Boyd had a presentation called "We Don't Need a Better Heart Attack." And Dr. Shelby Parker and the folks at NB Power did some research and come up with the 40-10-50 model. Anybody familiar with it? Especially with NB Power, I hope you are, because if not, but the 40-10-50 model, and then I'm going to give a high-level gloss over, I'm not going to teach you about it, but basically what the research says is that 40% of the time we are thinking about things that happened in the past. What did we have for breakfast? What did I say to my wife or my husband on the way to the door? Oh God, am I going to be in trouble? Because now I'm thinking about the future. 50% of the time we're thinking about the future. What's for lunch? Where am I going to go after this? Oh, it's going to be heck because the bridge is down. I'm going to have to drive around. 50% of that time you're thinking about the future. Only 10% of the time are we thinking about the now. And that's scary. Now, that's been based on research, and that tells you that, and everybody's built pretty much the same way. It fluctuates a few percentage points, but the average is 10% of the time we are thinking about here and now. Now, does that mean you can change everybody and say, I want you present? The minute you walk through the door, all you need to be thinking about everything. It's not going to happen because we know people are not built that way. But what it does do is it gives you the opportunity to think about if you have somebody who's now going to take on a high-risk task, something where they have the potential to be seriously injured. It's a chance for you to have that conversation with them, to bring up that you need to be present. I understand that you may be thinking about other stuff, but this, for this next 10, 15, 20 minutes, that while we're doing the task, I need you to be in the moment because it's high hazard, because there's high potential. So it's not about, anybody ever seen a corrective action coming out of an investigation that says, talk to an employee about paying more attention? But that's again, you don't understand. Well, if they just paid more attention, they wouldn't have ever heard. But it's not that simple, because that's not the way we're doing it. So again, this understanding that people have to be reminded that if they're going into a high hazard task, So distractions are a real thing. When I was with the trucking company years ago, I had this happen to me, and it was kind of one of those things that it was kind of one of those aha moments that you have in your life. I was walking across the floor and back to my office, and a truck driver came through, was walking to the dispatch, and he was one of those guys, you saw him before, you heard him sort of before you saw him. He was loud, he was boisterous, he was always in a good mood. And I hollered across the floor, "Hey, how you doing?" And I got up. And I kind of went, "Oh, that was weird." I'm back to my office and thought about it a little more and went, "No, something wrong there. I don't understand." So I went down, stood next to him at the dispatch counter and said, "What's going on? What's happening? What's going on?" And, "Come on, let's go. Let's go up to your truck." So we went up to the truck. Again, one of those things I learned early in my career. People are more comfortable when they're in comfortable surroundings. Truck drivers, take them up to the truck, kick the tires. That is where they are the most comfortable. So we went up to the truck, kicking the tires. "What's going on? What's happening? Look, you just not, there's something going on." Anyway, he unloaded them. Like it was a bad 90s country song. His wife was leaving him, his kid was on drugs, the dispatch is like, you know what? And the truck payment was behind, like he just unloaded on me. And I was like, holy crap. Anyway, we talked about it, I empathized with them, and then I went away, and went back to my office. Thinking, he called me the next day, and when he called, he said, "Darrel, look, I really appreciate the conversation we had yesterday." And I honestly didn't remember the conversation. It was one of those things, it was a non-event in my life. It was one of those things where I kind of had to go, oh, yeah, right, kicking the tires, yeah. Look, I said, no problem, look, we're just chatting. I said, I couldn't fix any of your problems. And he said, "You didn't have to fix my problems, you listened." He said, "I was in a mood that if I had gone down the road, I probably would have run somebody over just out of spite." He said, "I was mad at the world." He said, "At least you listened to me, you let me get it off my chest. And then I could drive down the road." He said, "I got to deal with my no problem." But that was one of those aha moments that triggered on me, is that you know the folks that you're working with. And when you see they're not quite the same, doesn't mean you have to become a counselor, doesn't mean you have to become Oprah and go hug them and give them a big suggestion to do that as a visit to HR that you don't want to have. But you know the folks when they're having a hard time, have a conversation with them, just ask them how they're doing, let them talk. And you'd be surprised at how, some people won't, some people will tell you to go away, maybe not politely, but they'll tell you to go away, and that's okay too, that's their way. But maybe you'll get a chance, maybe you'll trigger something in them that will help them. You just don't know. So distractions are one of those things that are in every one of our lives. So we need to think about, we need to understand what are those signs for distractions. Well, how do we look for them? How do we understand what they are? And this was in the power thing, up your tent. Like that, up your tent. So that means, again, think about if we do have those high hazard moments, how do we get folks to focus at that time? You can't tell them to focus all the time, because it's not going to happen. And people don't check their problems at the door. They're always going to have, everybody's got baggage, no matter who you are, and it's always going to be on your mind. So how do we get the folks to focus at the most important times? I have a video of distractions. I hope it's going to work. This is one of those stressful times.
And are you applying alone or with your spouse?
With my wife.
Okay, great. I'd like you to fill out these forms and call the kids downstairs.
Okay. Why?
Because dinner is ready.
full of distractions. Cutting shakes needs all your attention.
Work Safe PC does some fantastic reviews, and you suggest you go take a look at some of them. They're great for, you just see they have impact. I'm glad they didn't go where I thought they were going to go, or that I'm pretty sure they're all thinking the same thing. I'm going to have to probably do this. I may need some help. I figured it out, sorry. Give me some time. But again, as you can see, distractions happen all the time, and our folks it can lead to very serious injuries. So it's about understanding what they are and how do we manage those. And that kind of leads us right into human error. Been doing a bit of research on human error as well, trying to understand it, and it comes down to why people do the things that they do. And it's not because they're lazy, not because they're stupid, not because they don't know better. We're humans. Humans make mistakes. And it happens all the time. So we think about human error. These are the main types of error. And then we do a little technical on that. They're skill-based or action-type errors. They call it execution errors. They're slips and lapses. Decision-based or thinking errors. And then there's the non-compliance errors. There's a chart. There's a chart. But when you think about human error, we all fall into these traps. So if you think about it from a slip perspective, they call it attention-based slips. Has anybody ever been driving somewhere and either taken the exit they didn't want to take or missed the exit that they wanted to take?
Go to the wrong city.
Go to the wrong city. Look, it happens. Right? You're driving to work. It did happen to me last month. We're driving in town. There's an exit that I take every day to go to work. Our plan was to go to our friend who's on the west side of St. John. And as we're driving, my car automatically drove up the off-ramp to go to work. My wife looked at me and said, "Where are you going?" Work. It's Saturday. Okay? Those things, we get into autopilot. Driving is one of those things that we do just out of habit. Probably one of the most dangerous things we can do in our day. There's a lot of hazards we got to face. But we get on autopilot and we just go. And a lot of our folks that are working get into autopilot. They become muscle memory. We just do it because we've done it every day. We do it whatever. Doesn't matter what the task is. So we have to remember that part of human error, we will get into this, the terms used associated with familiar task requires a little conscious thought. Like our gentleman doing the shakes. It was something he did every day, day in, day out. He knew exactly what he needed to do. And when your mind wanders in those, that's when bad things can happen. Memory lapses. Anybody ever gone to Costco? Got a whole cart full of stuff. On your way home and go, I went into bread. Forgot to pick up the meal. Happens all the time, doesn't it? Those are the memory lapses that we have. It's part of the nature. It happens. And when you think about it from your perspective, if you have somebody who is doing the same thing all the time, they're into a routine, or maybe it's something they haven't done for a while, we can have memory lapses. We can have this area, these memory failures or lapses, and we forget a step. And 9 times out of 10, it's not that bad. That 10th because that step that we forget could be crucial. And then we get into what they call rule-based and knowledge-based mistakes. So rule-based is really the misapplication of a good rule. We've got a good rule, we've got a good policy, a good procedure. Somebody really didn't understand it, and we misapplied it. Or we have application of a bad one. Anybody ever had a bad policy or a bad procedure? No, it happens, right? You can't be perfect all the time. So sometimes we end up with things change over time, and sometimes the paperwork doesn't catch up. So you've changed the process, and your procedure doesn't change, and now you're training other people to the paper and not the process. And all of a sudden, they're now misapplying a bad rule. So it happens. And again, these are the things, when you talk about it from a human factors perspective, this is not a time to go all crazy and start firing people and start, causing all kinds of grief. These things happen every day. So recognize why humans do the things that they do and understand the implications. There is no face is that unfamiliar task or equipment. A lot of our maintenance folks, when you're working on mechanical devices, you got a pump, you got something they're working on, they're used to working on it, they work on them all the time, and maybe they encounter something different. Maybe it's a different pump, maybe it's a different part, maybe it's a different process. And when they do, they now have to apply knowledge. So they're taking all of their previous history and all the things that they've been taught, and now they're trying to fix the problem. And sometimes they make mistakes. So we have to be aware of the human error model because distractions can come into play, and it's all part of this whole psychological factors. So we talked about what can we do about this. The action errors are not intended. So when we look at those action errors, the slips and lapses, your control measure should never be more training. And again, I'm going to ask the question, how many of you have seen on a corrective action? Well, a mistake was made, so let's train them. Let's send them back through training, because obviously they did it the first time. Sometimes it's not a good idea. Because if you train them, maybe it was just they forgot. Maybe it was a lapse. And now we're going to punish them by sending them out. Again, to the trainers in the room, I don't mean punish them by sending them to training for time. You know what I mean? And there's also organizational learning and diagnostic tools that are available to help you with this whole human error. And again, touching on these subjects, hoping that something maybe sparks that you can kind of go, oh, I want to learn more about that. So, question is, where is your organization? Are you more in the psychological danger zone, or are you more in the psychological safe zone? The CSA has now come out with a new standard that folks can adopt or at least use as a guide. How do we move from where we were to where we need to be? And when you look at again, the spirit of making mistakes, blaming others, this is kind of, I go to some people here today, this is where we were 5 years ago, but we still have this happening today. How do we move more to this comfortable admitting mistakes and learning from our failures? One of the things we've got to learn is that when a failure happens, it's an opportunity to learn and get better, as opposed to shoot people when things go wrong. So those are all the factors. And the base of this whole house is about communication. Good. So when we talk about that, often communication sees the consequences. When we look at our investigations, how many times have you seen, communication, either bad communication between the folks, or there was no communication that happened between the parties involved? So again, is it around our ability to communicate, the common language and understanding of the signs and symptoms? Have you seen this before? Do we teach our folks this? I hope. Or do we assume that when they come in, they know this? So part of, we talked about the fact that people move all across the country. Is this the same everywhere you go? Does this mean the same thing? I don't know. But we have to understand there are language barriers. There are folks that are new to the industry. There are folks that have been around the industry, and maybe when we worked out west, or they worked in Newfoundland, they worked someplace else where maybe the signs were different. You can't assume that everybody is using the same thought pattern that you are. And especially written communication. We've got a lot of foreign workers coming in. We've got a lot of folks now new to the industry. One of the things I've heard for years is that, especially the construction industry, we're short on people. We need to hire more people. And we've got a lot of new immigrants that are coming into New Brunswick to help us with this. And as we hire them, are there those language barriers? Is there understanding of the things that we take for granted? In safety, we always talk about everything that happens. That common language, again, we use a lot of industry jargon, acronyms, things that people are, we just get used to it. We talk about FLRAs, JSAs, JTAs, they all mean the same thing at the end of the day, but we all use a different term, job safety analysis, job task analysis. It's your pre-job risk assessment. But we have differences that we have to identify. So, when I say AC, what does that mean to you? Does that mean maybe current if you're electrically minded? Does it mean air conditioning if you're in that business? Just using that term, we use it all the time. Again, it's an easy, quick way for us to get this, but some people will misconstrue that. What about ground? Again, to our electrical folks, we understand what ground is. To our civil folks, stuff you dig or move from one point to another. So again, I have to understand what is the perspective. What about pipe? If we say pipe, which one are you going to get? Tell somebody to go get pipe. If you get the bottom one, we're going to go back to a few slides and talk about drug and alcohol. There's definitely a language barrier there. But again, we just to illustrate the point that we use common terms every day. We can't automatically assume, because what happens when we assume, that causes maybe potentially the stress level in somebody else, because now they're going, oh God, I gotta go get a widget. I don't know what a widget is. Okay? So again, understanding these barriers and teach the common terms. Again, don't automatically assume, because we do that all the time. We also want to look for the signs and symptoms. You know, what are the things that, what can we understand from an unfit worker? Not just about drugs or alcohol, but what about fatigue? What about stress? What about those human factors, heads in the game? Now we need to understand what are all those hazards that our folks are facing, and what do we need to do to put things in place. So we need to understand what impairment looks like, regardless of what type of impairment it is, and we need to have a plan. That's always the toughest part. What is that plan? Because there's a lot of facets you've got to cover off. So this is what I call the fit for duty house model. It talks about the 3 pillars. So it's more than just drugs and alcohol. We need to understand that it is part of our risk management process. We need to understand what those hazards are and develop a plan so that we can ensure the right controls are in place to make sure that our folks are safe. I'll go back to the risk perception and tolerance model. So now we've talked about some hazards. Maybe you've identified, maybe we've talked about some hazards that you didn't think about before. So now we're hopefully able to identify them, or at least gives you a spark to maybe say, I need more information, I need to go find that. I need to go do some more research. And do you understand them? In a talk in about an hour, you're not going to understand it all. So again, we need to get to that point where our workers see the hazards, they understand them, they know that they're an issue. And bottom line is, we now have a decision to make, is do we accept the risk? Do we have plans in place to ensure that our folks are fit for duty based on all those criteria? And do we have a good plan that we can say, we now understand the hazards, we know what the hazards are, we understand them, and now we accept them because we put the controls in place. Or we accept them just because, hey, but I'm not good with it. If you just paid attention, you wouldn't have been a problem. Get that all the time. With that, especially when you get to the thank you slide. So again, my goal coming into this was hopefully to share some information that I've learned and hopefully it sparked an interest. Maybe again, it's reminded you of some things that you already knew. And maybe there's been a couple things that you picked up on, or at least one you picked up on and say, maybe I want to learn some more about that. My contact information is there. Reach out at any time. And as I said, I know the presentation will be supplied, so I have all the references for all the material. It's all there. You can go do your own research and read. Are there any questions? I like that. Any questions I can't answer? I either wowed you or baffled you with BS and you're waiting for lunch.